Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, class. We're from Group 4, and today we are going to present our topic about speech communities. But before we start our presentation, let me introduce our group member. First is Iqfa Septiasari, and then Nurina Nasira, and the last is me, Dianti Anjani Putri. Next slide. Our topic consists of three material. That is, the first is definition, and the next is intersecting communities, and the last is networks and repertoires. The first materials will be delivered by Iqfa. Iqfa, time is yours.
Thank you, Anjani. Okay, I want to explain about definition of speech community. Next. The speech community is believed to have originated from German fragments itself, as we know that language is both an individual possession and a social possession that contains individuals which behave linguistically like other individuals. They might be said to speak the same language or the same dialect or the same variety, that is to be employ the same product, and it is in that respect to be member of the same speech community. Next. What a speech community is not. Speech communities do not exist simply because individuals share the same language or dialect. Although this idea was put forward as an early definition of speech community. This is a statement based on Lyon in 1970. In order to come to justifiable sociolinguistic definition of speech community, categorized other than just language need to be considered. Next. Why? Because there is no unambiguous definition of language or dialect. And the other reason is language is not the only characteristic achieve group identity. Next slide. In statement above, he said that the speech community is not defined by any market agreement in the use of language elements so much as by participation in a set of shared norms. This norm may be observed in overt types of evaluation behavior. However, Labo's statement above actually biases the understanding of the concept of speech community, because based on its definition, linguistic criteria are clearly not needed in defining a speech community. Next slide. In Hudson's statement, he rejects that view. Our sociolinguistic world is not organized in terms of objective speech community. Even though we like to think subjectively in terms of communities or social types. This means that the search of a true definition of the speech community or for the true boundaries around some speech community is just a wild goose chase. We will indeed discover that just as it is difficult to define such terms as language, dialect, and variety, it is also difficult to define speech community, and for many of those some reason. In sociolinguistics, speech community refer to a group of people who have the opportunity to interact with each other and who share not just a single language with its related varieties, but also attitudes toward linguistic norms. Speech community also can be defined by geography, ethnicity, social economy, economic class, but also occupation, gender, religion, etc. It follows that individuals can identify with multiple speech communities and can adjust their language according to the circumstance so as to identify in the most appropriate way. Different speech community way have different grammar phenomenon, preference for word or morpheme. Next slide. Okay, in conclusion of the definition, speech community is everything is relative. Everything group is relative concept. So speech community must also be relative, such as English speech community, Texas speech community, Harvard speech community, and Indonesian speech community. And next, the topic of interacting communities will be presented by Dianti.
Okay, thank you, Ikfa. Next slide, please. Okay, people from all around the world uses many different expressions such as New York speech, London speech, South African speech, etc. This phenomenon indicates that they have some idea of how a typical person from each place speaks, that is, of what it is like to be a member of a particular speech community, somewhat loosely defined. Next. Since each person speaks their own typical way according to its place of origin or specific speech community, then when we are communicating, we should know who our speech communities are. It means that we need to use a language which is appropriate with people who are invited to communicate. Therefore, we can say that the ability to fit our language to speech community is called intersecting communities. Next. This concept must be flexible because individuals find it advantageous to shift their identities quite freely. As Bollinger say, there is no limit to the ways in which human beings link themselves together for self-identification, security, gain, amusement, worship, or any of other purpose that are held in common. Consequently, there is no limit to the number and the variety of speech communities that are to be found in a society. Next. To understand this phenomenon, we must recognize that each member of a community has a repertoire of social identities, and that each identity in a given context is associated with a number of appropriate verbal and nonverbal forms of expression. However, there is not a clear way on how to define how individuals can classify themselves, and speakers are creating and recreating social identities. So it is impossible to predict the group or community he or she will consider itself to belong in a particular moment. Since the group will change according to situation, or an individual may also attempt to bond with others because all possess a set of characteristics or even just a single characteristic. Next. So to conclude, this means that each individual is therefore a member of many different groups. One of the consequences of the intersecting identification is therefore, of course, a linguistic variation. Next. Okay, this material will be delivered by Nurina. Nurina, time is yours.
Okay, so now I'm going to explain about networks and repertoire. The first one is networks. Social networks tie together speakers who communicate with one another. The ties between these speakers may be strong, or they may be weak, and a speaker may have many ties or may have few. There are three types of networks according to Wardell. First, dense network, loose network, and multiplex network. So dense network is a strong network that happens when the people you know and interact with also know and interact with one another. As you can see in the graph, dense network form a circular shape. That means it is a strong network. For example, I interact with Dianti and Ikfa, and they both also interact with each other. The next one is loose network. Loose network is happen when the people you interact with do not interact with each other. So it forms a one-way network only. From in the graph, you can see it is a one-way only from A to B, A to C, A to D, and A to E. But B, C, D, E do not interact with each other. And the next one is multiplex network. Multiplex network is happen if the people within it are tied together in more than one way, which means not just through work, but also through other social activities. For example, me, Dianti, and Ikfa are interact with one another in this group discussion. But other than that, we also hang out together, we are having lunch together, etc. Other example of multiplex network is people who go to school together, marry each other's siblings, and people who work and play together. The next one is repertoire. According to Platt and Platt, as cited in Warrior, a speech repertoire is the range of linguistic varieties which the speaker has at his disposal and which he may appropriately use as a member of his speech community. The concept of speech repertoire may be most useful when applied to individuals rather than to groups. We can use it to describe the communicative competence of individual speakers. Each person will then have a distinctive speech repertoire. On the repertoire of individuals and specifically on the precise linguistic choices they make in well-defined circumstances that seem to offer us some hope of explaining how people use linguistic choices to bond themselves to others in very subtle ways. A speaker's choice of a particular sound, word, or expression marks that speaker in some way. Okay, I'm going to, now we're going to have a question and answer. So to anyone who have questions, please turn the microphone.
Okay, Irfan.
Okay, so thank you, Group 4, for your presentation. And I would like to ask about the detail on the linguistic variation, that being the consequence of intersecting identification. Could you kindly explain it more a bit, like specifically? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Maybe next question.
Me.
Okay, Haifa.
Yes, thank you. I want to ask about what norms are referred to in label statement. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe last question.
Me.
Wait. Oh, Rasintia. Okay.
I want to ask, can you give an example of speech repertoire? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please give us 5 minutes to find the answer. Thank you. All right. Maybe the question from Resintia and Haifa will be answered by Ikfa and Nurina. Ikfa, you have okay.
Okay. Okay, I want to answer the hyper question. Okay, so the answer is referring to label statement in the introduction to sociolinguistics on the definition of speech community. The norm referred to are more or less. Society is not defined by difference in the use of language elements, but it is seen for the large number of participants in a set of mutually agreed norms. This norm can be observed in evaluative behavior in uniform pattern of abstract variation that are inherent in level of languages. Oh, okay, that's Aifa. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. Thank you, Ikfa.
Okay, now I'm going to answer the Cynthia's question, which is, can you give an example of speech repertoire? The answer is, when students from East or Central Java came to UIN Jakarta to study, they will use Indonesian language to communicate. But when they meet with students that are also came from the same region, they probably will use the same language, which is Javanese. So that is one of the example of speech repertoire. Cynthia, is it clear now?
Okay, that's enough. Thank you, Nurina.
Welcome.
All right. The last question from Irfan about the linguistic variation. So the linguistic variation are like, first, the people who do not speak alike, or nor does any individual always speak in the same way on every occasion. So the variation we see in language must partly reflect a need that people have to be seen as the same as certain other people on some occasion, and as different from them on other occasions. So yeah, that's it, Irfan. Is it clear enough?
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you for the answer.
Okay. Since we have answered all of the question, means that this is the end of our presentation. For those who joined this class, please fill out the attendance list on the Google form. Is it already shared, Ikfa? Sudah.
Yes, it's already shared.
Okay. Okay, so everyone, thank you for your attention. Hope it will be helpful. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.